Isaiah 19 verses 23 to 25. This is giving all praises to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua Ba'ashem Bakar Kodash. This is a video that Vocab Malone had put up, and he's recently been going back and forth with Sakari. I know it's somewhere in the west. I believe it's Arizona or Phoenix, Arizona, or somewhere in the west. And I heard him mention it in another video. But this video is entitled Sakari Defends Drawing Guns at Camp. Hashtag Stop the Violence. And in a previous video, I would say a couple of days ago, maybe a week ago, he confronted one of the Sakari camps concerning Isaiah, the 19th chapter, and the 23rd to the 25th verse. By the way, Isaiah is a prophet. So, Isaiah, if you go to the book of Isaiah, there's a lot of things in the book of Isaiah that seem to not make any sense if you don't understand prophecies, or the prophecies of Isaiah. And Most High willing, I'm just going to touch on this. I didn't put a deep lesson with a whole lot of precepts, but I went to a couple of precepts to show you that well, let me read the verse. Isaiah 19 verse 23 to 25. In that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. Now, can you physically go from, you can go from Egypt to Assyria, but does that highway mean there's going to be a straight road from the physical land Egypt to the physical land Assyria? No. It's symbolic for nations that are outside of Israel. When you read the scriptures, the northern kingdom was taken into captivity by the Assyrians, and the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, was taken captive by the Babylonians. So what you're going to find out is that Egypt and Assyria in Isaiah the 19th chapter are talking about two places that are not the land of Israel. Egypt is also, we also teach and believe, and we are backed up by scriptures, that Egypt is another name for America. Egypt is known as prophetically America. Assyria is also known as America. Babylon is also spoken of in Revelation and in Jeremiah. We know that Babylon is referring to America. So when Vocab Malone read the scripture to these individuals in Sakari, he claimed that they didn't want to deal with it. They kind of went to another scripture and avoided dealing with this breakdown. And Vocab Malone, he knows absolutely nothing about prophecy. You know, he's reading this like it's literal, like it's talking about the Egyptians and the Assyrians. It says Isaiah 19 verse 23 verse 25, in that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and Assyria will come into Egypt. So if you look at this literally, how is the land of Assyria going to come into the land of Egypt? It's not talking about the actual lands. It's prophetic for lands outside of the homeland, Israel. And like I said, I'm not going to read all of Isaiah the 19th chapter. I will most likely go into it more in depth tomorrow, most high willing, Yahweh Bashem Yahushua Ratazah. But when you look at these scriptures, when you look at these prophetic scriptures, you have to look at them with a spiritual eye. Vocab does not possess the magic eye, the spiritual eye. He does not have the eye salve on his eyes. So he doesn't understand the prophecies. That's why he makes unlearned statements like such as Edom was done away with. No evidence. No evidence. Edom is still here. The ruling kingdom would be biblically the kingdom of Edom. This is Esau's kingdom. The ruling authority of this planet are the Edomites. Let me read this again. Isaiah 19, verse 23, verse 25 to verse 25. In that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and Assyria will come into Egypt. So we know that it's not talking about physical Egypt and physical Assyria. And Egypt into Assyria. And the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. So now we know it's talking about people. It's not talking about Egyptian people and Assyrian people coming together. It's talking about Israelites being scattered through in different areas of the world. Egypt being spiritually is America, and Assyrians are also known as America. Now they could have just put in the word Babylon instead of Egypt, or Babylon instead of Assyria. So what vocab did was he said you're going to have a certain amount of Egyptians and a certain amount of Assyrians. They're going to worship the Lord, which he doesn't understand the prophecies. Like I said, there ain't no Egyptians are worshiping the Lord. They ain't no Egyptians calling on the name of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. There ain't no Egyptians or Assyrians calling the white man Edomites or following your doctrine, which is Calvinism. Bottom line is you don't understand prophecy, so you should look. This is above your pay grade. So now what I did was, like I said, I was gonna pull out a bunch of precepts. I just wanted to touch on this. Now let's go to Hosea 9. I'm gonna start the first verse. I'm gonna jump around. I'll read verse 1, verse 3, and I'll jump down to verse 10, and then from there I'll go to Hosea chapter 7. I should really read this whole chapter, but I'm going to touch on verse 11 and I'm going to touch on Hosea 7 verse 11 and Hosea 8 verse 3. So let me come back. Yeah, vocab Malone, you have no business messing with the prophetic scriptures, because you don't understand prophecies, because you're not a prophet. It says here in Hosea 9:1, rejoice not, O Israel, for joy, talking about the Israelites, obviously, as other people, for thou hast gone a whoring from thy power. Thou hast loved a reward upon every corn floor. In other words, Israel, the reason why Israel as a nation was punished is because they turned their back on the Most High and they were following other gods. Let me jump down to the third verse, Hosea 9 verse 3. They shall not dwell in the Lord's land. They, Ephraim, shall not dwell in the Lord's land. And when were they put out of the Lord's land? They were put out of the Lord's land as a northern kingdom by Shalmaneser V, the king of Assyria. It says, Hosea 9 verse 3 again, they shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt. Now there's no record of the Ephraimites returning back to Egypt. Now we do know you had Judites that were that had went back to Egypt, that some of them were cast into slavery back in Egypt, mainly in Alexandria, Egypt. When you go into the record of the Maccabees during the time period of the Ptolemaic and Seleucid dynasty, or that line of dynasty, excuse me, they were put into captivity. I mean, you can go to the secular history and read up on that. So let me read the third verse again. They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim, because we know what happened to Ephraim and or the northern kingdom, they were taken down by the Assyrian kingdom. So at one time they were actually under the rulership of the Assyrians. And as the history goes, they came over here to the Americas. And if you go to Revelation chapter 11 verse 8, it reads Sodom and Egypt, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. So America was known as Sodom and Egypt and Babylon and Assyria. It says, third verse again, they shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt, and they shall, so Egypt prophetically meaning America, and they shall eat unclean things in Assyria. So Ephraim went to the Americas, and what did they do? They ate unclean things. And mind you, in the land of Puerto Rico, they ate unclean things because that wasn't their land. And they were not walking around calling themselves Israelites. They had lost their nationality or religion, so to speak. So I see it's necessary, Most High willing, tomorrow to go to the book of Isaiah the 19th chapter. It speaks in Isaiah the 19th chapter about 5 cities, and 5 cities shall speak the language of Canaan. And the language of Canaan is Hebrew. Now let me jump down to the 13th verse of Hosea 9. Ephraim, as I saw Tyrus, is planted, Ephraim meaning the Ephraimites, as I saw Tyrus is planted in a pleasant place. That pleasant place that Hosea saw was the land of the island of Puerto Rico. Ephraim, as I saw Tyrus, is planted in a pleasant place. But Ephraim shall bring forth his children. So the parents of the Ephraimites, eventually they're going to go to America, shall bring forth his children to the murderer. And who are the murderer? Esau. The first murderers were the conquistadors that conquered all those islands, Central and South America and all the islands. That's why when you go to Mexico, when you go to Puerto Rico, when you go to Hispaniola or the DR or Costa Rica or any of those lands south of the U.S., they all speak Spanish. Why? Because Edomites, posing as the conquistadors from Spain, took them down. So they learned their language. They were forced. Well, what also was forced on them was their religion, which is Roman Catholicism. You go to any of those Latin American countries, if you're trying to find a Muslim down there, good luck. What you're going to find is a bunch of those tribes following the religion of Roman Catholicism. Now, Roman Catholicism in the beginning of North America wasn't big because you didn't have the conquistador from Spain take America. They had part of America. You had the Spanish-American War, French-American War, the Revolutionary War. So the religion and the language of America was mainly English. So let me read Hosea 9 verse 13 again. Ephraim, as I saw Tyrus, is planted in a pleasant place. That pleasant place that Hosea saw in the vision was the island of Puerto Rico. But Ephraim shall bring forth his children to the murderer, and the murderer represents Esau. So what did the Ephraimites do later in history? They went up to the Americas, New York, Chicago, other places. New York was a major place for Ephraim, but Ephraim has spread out somewhat. And the murderer was Esau, in the form of the so-called American white man. Let me look that word up let me go to the root of that word. The word is harag. Harag means to kill, slay, murder, destroy, murder, slayer, out of hand, to kill, to slay, to destroy, to ruin, to be killed, be slain. And that's what they did. That first took place. The first experience was when the conquistadors came into those lands. And later in history, they were brought up here to America by their fathers, by their parents. They were Let me go back to the verse again. Ephraim, as I saw in Tyrus, is planted in a pleasant place, Puerto Rico, but Ephraim shall bring forth his children to the murderer. So ultimately, for economic reasons, they came over here to America, and they were killed off, imprisoned, by Esau. Okay, I got a couple more precepts. Hosea, 7 verse 11. Ephraim, meaning the tribe of Ephraim, also is like a silly dove without heart. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria. So when you go back to this video, Isaiah 19, 23 to 25. In that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. We just read that in Hosea. Completely different prophet. And Assyria will come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. The Egyptians worshiping with the Assyrians are Israelites from other lands. And these are two major lands, Assyria and Egypt. Because where was Israel scattered? When you read Isaiah 11, it mentions a number of nations or land mass that they were scattered to. Egypt was mentioned, Cush was mentioned, Assyria was mentioned, Elam was mentioned. So vocab, this is not talking about a handful of Egyptians and a handful of Assyrians are going to, meet up with each other and worship the Lord. Hosea 7 verse 11 again. Ephraim also is like a silly dove without heart. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria. So you don't have Ephraimites trying to get back to the land of Israel. Hosea 9 verse 3. They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt, and they shall eat unclean things in Assyria. And I read that about 5 minutes ago. And those unclean things was when they first came over here to the Americas, to the island of Puerto Rico, port of riches. They were eating all that garbage. And when they came up to America, they continued to eat that garbage, and what they brought with them was Roman Catholicism and the Spanish language. Anyway, like I said, most High willing, I want to go into the whole chapter of Isaiah the 19th chapter tomorrow, most High willing. With that, I'm going to say shalom.